You take a bunch of iconic action stars and lump them into one film? You had me at iconic action stars. What's going on, people, and welcome to my film review series of The Expendables. In light of Expendables, yes, that'll become a thing, I will take this opportunity to go over each and every one of its previous entries, where I go into my in-depth thoughts and feelings, of course followed by a ranking, so strap in for that. And as always, thank you so much, guys, for clicking here. I really do appreciate it. So released in 2010, The Expendables tells the story of a team of mercenaries who are hired by a CIA agent to take down a Latin dictator and a rogue CIA agent off of a small South African island. So when this first came out, when I first heard of this, I had no idea what to expect. But then I heard who was going to be in it, and I was sold. Just pretty much on the spot. No questions asked. I adore a majority of these guys, especially Sylvester Stallone. I've been a Rambo fan since I can remember, since I was probably a kid. So when it came to The Expendables, again, I had no idea what I was going for, but because I sensed it was an action film and all these other stars, which I'll get into here in a little bit, was in it, there was no question about it. I was already sold. My ass was in the theater seat as soon as it came out. So starting off with the positives for The Expendables, I do gotta say, it was a definite assembled cast. There was so many stars in this, A-list stars, especially from the 80s and 90s, action iconic stars. To think of something like this could be made was pretty awesome. Any other time, I don't think it probably could have been made, but just knowing all these guys was in there. You have Jason Statham, you've got Jet Li, you've got Randy Couture, you've got Terry Crews, and for all you Rocky fans, Dolph Lundgren, all led by Sylvester Stallone, Rambo himself. And I thought that was a definite cool concept. Just the idea of all these guys teaming up after being in their own films, especially if you're a fan of all those old school 80s and 90s action flicks that had those particular guys in it that were always separate. The idea of lumping these guys all in one was a stroke of genius. I'm telling you, it was a stroke of genius. And all thanks to Sylvester Stallone, who actually directed this. This is actually coming straight off of the success of Rambo, the fourth Rambo entry, who he also directed. So whenever the concept to this came up, I'm pretty sure the studios jumped at it. Of course they did. It exists. And also for all you wrestling fans of the 90s, you also have Stone Cold Steve Austin, which I thought he added a nice extra touch as well. He basically plays one of the side villains, but a villain nonetheless, and I thought he added an extra nice touch to it as well. That's what I'm saying. This movie pretty much gave birth to the concept that iconic action stars of any kind can be in one movie and start something just spectacular. And that's what this film did, especially for that reason alone. Just the concept alone was just pure genius. All thanks to Sylvester Stallone. This is his baby. When he came up with this concept, he basically saved the action genre. Sure, we had like the MCU that was starting off at the time, but in terms of actions, like iconic action stars, and getting back to the basics of how action movies was, especially back in the 80s and 90s, which most people consider that like the golden era, Expendables pretty much brought it back to that era, brought it back to its peak of action, of just that old school action feel. We hardly ever get to see action of this magnitude, just that old school action type feel. It's basically all just IP nowadays, which is a shame. And that's what this movie brought. I mean, hell, you even have a cameo of Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Sylvester Stallone in one room. And let me tell you, back when I went to see this in theaters, now keep in mind, this was at a time when Arnold Schwarzenegger was just transitioning out of being governor of California. So nobody expected this, but when he showed up, when Arnold Schwarzenegger showed up, everybody gasped, including myself. It was just a big wave of gasps in the theater. And I'm telling you, that was one of those iconic moments. Now, they're not in it that much. That's like later on in this franchise, but that was a nice surprise. That was definitely a nice surprise. And I remember hearing all these stories how Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger used to be kind of against each other back in the day. Like they would always come out with movies that would try to outshine each other. So it was nice, seeing them actually work together and actually becoming one. And that was, again, it was a nice surprise. So you had the Terminator, you had Rambo, and you had John McClane in the same room. And believe me, they definitely elaborate a lot more in the second film, which I cannot wait to talk about. But moving on, the Expendables, the first Expendables was great. The action sequences was epic. It was very well paced. It's what you come to expect from a film like this, especially if they're trying to go back to the old school 90s action era. You had to have the right amount of action, and that's what the Expendables had. It was very well paced. It was very well toned. There was plenty of explosions. There was plenty of shoot 'em ups. And it's basically about a group of mercenaries that goes on this island and tries to fight off a lot of bad guys. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science. There is a negative side of that, which I'll get into here in a little bit, but it was pretty iconic, especially with the action sequences itself. Just adding all these other elements of what action films used to be was a nice treat. It was definitely a nice treat. The chemistry between the characters, like you had certain scenes between Stallone and Statham where they would argue and they would just joke with each other. And not with just with them two, with like Randy Couture and Terry Crews and Jet Li and Dolph Lundgren. It's just their chemistry and the dialogue in between each other. Like with Sylvester Stallone and Statham. There was one scene when they get to the island, Statham was like, "Have you ever been rejected?" And then Stallone was like, "You really pushing the boundaries of our relationship." It's just little moments like that. It just added icing to the cake. It was very well paced. It was very well dialogued. It just added a really nice comedic tone just for the dialogue between the characters alone. And just knowing that these are your favorite iconic action stars in one, and just seeing how they react to each other, how they play off of each other. And it was pretty good. It was awesome. Plus, they do something with Dolph Lundgren's character, which I really liked, where you have this character that's been working with Stallone and Statham and the good guys of things that has sort of like this mental problem, and they sort of choose him to go on like the villainous side only for a little bit. I mean, he doesn't do anything catastrophic, but it shows right off the bat that something's not right with this guy. He was a team member of the Expendables, of Stallone's crew. But then he kind of switches sides because he feels like he's been betrayed because of what happened in the first act. And then he switches sides, and then he like starts helping out the villains a little bit. And I thought that kind of gave the film a little bit of an extra spice. And luckily, by the end of the second act, something happens to where he takes a step back, Dolph Lundgren does, to where he's like, "No, maybe I need to stop acting like an asshole and actually be good for once. Just be a hero, not this crazy, wacky, wackadoo side, nonsense that I've been doing." I thought that it was a really good redeeming quality. And I thought that gave the movie an extra spice of like, it could get to anybody. I mean, Stallone actually confirms that at the beginning. It's like, it's this life. It gets to everybody. It gets to everybody. I know that's a terrible Stallone impersonation, but you get what I mean. And they throw in this contact on the island that Statham and Stallone meet, to where she kind of becomes a moral compass for Stallone's character. Sort of this eye-opener as to why she won't leave, and Stallone being like, "Why? There's nothing here. Why do you want to stay?" And then the girl's like, "No, maybe not to you, but to me it's important, and this is my home, and this and that." And it sort of becomes like a kind of a eye-opener for Stallone's character, and it's like, why would anybody want to stay? Well, maybe there's a good reason. And I like that little side concept as well. Moving on to my negatives, as much as I enjoyed this film, as much as I enjoyed the concept of all these iconic stars finally being in one film, as like every action fan's dream, there was some grievances I had with it. It wasn't perfect, but still, it is what it is. But the whole side plot of Statham's character's ex, just him dealing with this guy that she's with, and him being an asshole towards him and, you know, beating up on her. I mean, it doesn't really actually show all that, but there was certain scenes to where I felt like it kind of slowed down the movie a little bit. It didn't really help it a lot in that area. I didn't really feel like those scenes were necessary. I didn't really care. They could have just cut all that out and the movie would have been fine. Just that whole dynamic between this woman and Statham's character, it's like, really? Did we really need that? I don't think so. The story was a little weak. You have these group of mercenaries who's hired by this CIA ghost who goes to this island just to take down this rogue CIA agent and this Latin dictator. That's basically it. There's nothing catastrophic about it. There's nothing world dominating about it. It's just straightforward. Now, I know that's how most of the 80s and 90s action flicks was, but we're in a different time now, and we need more to stories than just meets the eye, if that makes any sense. The story was a little weak. They could have improved on that a little bit. Not to mention the fact that you got a couple of villains that were really weak as well, that just didn't really help at all. The story and the villains were the weakest element, and those are your most important parts to a film. Despite all of its action and craziness and crazy goofy dialogue between the main characters, I felt like there could have been more to the story and more to the villains. Eric Roberts plays the rogue CIA agent that they're trying to take down. I just thought he just brought such a weak element. Not to mention this Latin dictator who was pretty much a lackey, and they tried to make him as some sort of a warlord. But to me, he didn't come across to me as nothing. He didn't really seem that threatful. With Eric Roberts' character alone, he just plays an asshole. That's it. I mean, I know most villains are assholes, but you gotta give me something more. You gotta give me more reason for me to dislike these characters. Yes, I disliked them, but not on a villainous stand. They really shouldn't have been like the main villains of this film. They should have just been like side characters. They might as well have been side characters, because I didn't get nothing out of them. I can forget the whole pointless ex-girlfriend of Jason Statham side plot, but you still need a good story and some plausible threat to back it up at least. Despite its flaws, I loved this movie. It was a good enough start that kicked off an awesome franchise, despite what grievances I may have later on in this review series, and I kinda do, regretfully. Still, it was a good enough start for a franchise that was just starting off at the time. It's a happy accident. The Expendables, what was your thoughts on it? Were you a fan of this particular entry? Did you like seeing all your iconic action stars lumped into one? For those of you who are a fanatic of 80s and 90s action flicks, did you like seeing all these guys together, or were you not a fan of this? Are you a fan of any of the entries of the later ones? You think those triumphed over this one? Leave me a comment down below and give me your thoughts. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this. I really do appreciate it. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. And make sure to click that bell icon as always and set it to all so you don't miss a thing. And I will see you on the next one. Peace.